how many cell sites do they have to put up? I mean, they say Texas is 3 times the size of the UK.
Yeah.
So that's simple mathematics. That's 100,000 base stations that have got to be in Texas.
And you've got to
obviously
put up
it's
with
not going to work
shooting
out like
the
that.
base stations when they get pissed on a Friday.
But there's going to be so many base stations in North America.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. I seem to have got over my cold this week, but giving it to Ian. Bad luck, Ian. And Jamie's dragged himself in from yet another rugby injury, so thanks for joining us, Jamie.
But at least you recovering quickly shows it's not coronavirus, if I called it off you.
That's a good point. Because I don't even know how long it takes to get over coronavirus.
Well, I don't know.
It doesn't
Actually,
finish you off.
But you didn't seem too bad.
No. All right. Well, you don't seem too bad either.
No, I know. But
stop moaning.
Yeah, it's early days, isn't it?
It's early days, yeah. That's it. If you're not in on Monday, I'll ring around. Okay. So those are the people who are on it. And this week we're going to be talking, not first up, but I'm sure coronavirus is going to come up. Not just because the first thing we're going to talk about is Huawei, because there isn't a direct connection there. But they were doing their pre-Mobile World Congress thing, and Mobile World Congress got cancelled because of coronavirus. And there's some other stuff that we've been writing about that's relevant to that. And then the other thing that we want to talk about is Deutsche Telekom's numbers, which also has a coronavirus angle. And then if we have time at the end, we might talk about Fitbit and wearables and that sort of thing. So before we start, just to remind you that if you're watching it on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud and other podcasting platforms. Right, so yesterday... so just like a week ago, in the last podcast, we were talking about Ericsson's pre-Mobile World Congress thing, which obviously there's no Mobile World Congress for it to be pre-of, but they did it anyway, which seems fair enough. But it was it felt a little bit flat. I wrote that. A few Ericsson fanboys got a bit butthurt. What can you do?
I don't think you were that nasty.
No, I didn't think I was either, but there's one thing you learn about publishing stuff is there's a gap between what you write and the message you were trying to convey and what is inferred or even just literally read by a person. Two people can read the same thing and derive completely different things from it. And I think people who work for these kit vendors get quite protective towards their companies. And if they even detect that you're having a pop, or even if you just write something that might cause their company any issue at all, even if they don't detect any malice in your approach, they'll still get a bit defensive in the comments. Anyway, I've been having fun with them, just messing with the trolls. For me, it's good sport. So keep it coming. Bring it on. I'm fine with it. So that was that. And so, this week we had Huawei's one, which, just to remind everyone, I mean, if you're watching this or listening to it on Monday, today was supposed to be the first day of Mobile World Congress. And so that's their pre-Mobile World Congress thing. The highlight of it was Jamie, who once more dragged himself off his rugby sickbed to host a panel at this Huawei thing. So there's quite a lot of people there. What do you reckon? You weren't there. In the audience, 250 was it? Yeah. It was
250 people who were what?
Well, this is primarily. Well, it was some Huawei staff, some analysts big customers, right. But this was mainly their media and analyst event to say, this is what we're doing. And then they've got one next week, which is. Well, we were talking about it. I can't really. I don't know
it's
what they're going to say.
Replicate what they were going to say at the show.
But but I think it's for customers and partners and stuff like that. For people that aren't press and media.
Yeah, well, I'm only getting invited by some PR agency.
I didn't get an invite to that one.
You didn't get an invite. Okay, I'm clearly more important than you.
You must be. I probably wouldn't be going anyway.
Was that ever in dispute? No, I don't think it was. Good. Great job. I mean, of all the people they could have got, they got Telecoms.com. I was so proud. So you stood up, did a great job. You had a panel of 5 people from industry. So the point of your panel was to talk about 5G and industry, i.e. practical applications of 5G. How far along are we? What practical applications could there be? So why don't you just give us a quick sort of rundown of how that panel went?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was all about the idea of being pragmatic and saying, well, where is 5G and sort of what needs to be done to the ecosystem and all the players in it to take 5G forward. I mean, that was the overall messages. And I mean, it was quite interesting. I mean, obviously, when other people get on the stage, they're always a bit reserved in what they actually said, especially when, you have got press and media in the audience.
Yeah.
You're always got your tail up a bit when there's press, when someone can write it about you.
And most people, it's not their day job as it is for us to just gob on about stuff every week.
I mean,
so
they're not
so used to it.
Well, they're not necessarily spokespeople for the company as well. But there was some very interesting points. I mean, for instance, like the BBC person was there, and she turned around and said, "Well, the idea about 5G for us is speed. We don't really care about. It's the sort of the flexibility and the reliability of it, and the fact that you can carry around embed 5G in these sort of camera products now.
Get rid of cables. And
stuff
like that.
It's an entirely wireless experience and they were saying if we actually want to shoot something on site. If we take all our cabling down, it will take us. I mean, Pierre will know because he was setting up yesterday. Yeah, because it takes ages to set it up, doesn't it? But if you've got a completely wireless experience, all of a sudden you're in and out, and you're laughing.
And your camera's got a 5G connection.
Yeah. And then there was a chap from Goodwood, and the Goodwood is an estate company.
I wasn't sure why was that guy there.
Well, they're still going to apply. I mean, it's just the idea of bringing someone new in and to explain how 5G will be.
They have some pretty big events.
Yeah, they do the Goodwood Festival of Speed.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's what I thought.
Yeah, but then they also run a massive estate. So they have, farming. They have, like he was talking about, testing tracks and all that sort of thing on there. So there are a lot of interesting applications there. I find him quite an interesting guy, and it was. I thought the most interesting aspect about him was that he's a business person, not a technologist.
Yeah.
So the gap in knowledge between what he understands technology is and what the telcos are actually believe the value of 5G is, I think is the interesting conundrum, because he turned around. He's looking at it purely from a business perspective, not a technology perspective. And he said, 5G for us is to create a new experience on the event side, but then also to be more intelligent in the way that we do farming, etc., all that. So I think it's, he's looking at it from a business perspective, which is where I've always thought the telco industry has particularly struggled, because they're looking at it from a technology perspective.
I agree 100%. That was the biggest thing I took away from it. It's just a little wake-up call. You're talking to people and they're going, everyone's been going rah 5G, but like the BBC lady just went, but where are these cool use cases? I haven't seen them yet. And it's, 5G is supposed to be all about. We keep getting told it's not about enhanced mobile broadband, really, even though that's all they got to go on right now. It's all about this Industry 4.0. I don't know. Does anyone know what 1, 2, and 3 were? Was 1 the Industrial Revolution? Was 1 when they invented the wheel? Yeah.
So this is.
I don't know what 2 and 3 were. Anyway.
So I think the first one was Steam.
Yeah.
Those
the last one's computers.
Fire.
3's computers, basically.
Yeah.
3's moved to computer age, but 4 is like
so maybe 2's flight or something. So. All right. So now we're at 4, and now to show how contemporary we are, it's 4.0. What a stupid thing to say.
It's copying Die Hard.
Are we going to have Industry 4.1? .1.1.1. God, that winds me up.
Anyway. 6G.
So I'm going to call it Industry 4 now, just to lodge a formal protest about that dot.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's supposed to be all about IoT and everything being connected and all that sort of thing. But in practice, that's why it's good to have those 5 people you were chatting to yesterday, because they go, yeah, great idea. So where is it then?
But this is a problem I think has been the industry has been facing. Well, I say the industry, the telcos have been facing for a while, because I went to Mobile World Congress Shanghai 2 years ago, I think it was, and this was prior.
Still going ahead to the best of our knowledge.
This was prior to all the vertical and in enterprise chat really kicking off in Europe. And the one thing I was absolutely amazed by over there is that you looked at the operator stands, and every single one of them was talking about, agricultural applications, the smart home, the smart factory. They were talking about enterprise applications so much further in advance than the European telcos.
Okay, good point.
Like I think that this is I think the Western telcos are miles behind the Asian telcos when it comes to developing business cases for the verticals and developing effective communications models to demonstrate value, as opposed to simply going, 5G is faster, isn't it?
CES shows a lot of American companies about farming.
But when?
Yeah.
This was I think it was like 2017, maybe even 3 years ago that I went across there. So we're talking like years ago that the Chinese companies were well in advance of Europe in particular. Maybe I can't speak on behalf of the US.
Yeah, but the obsession in the US is all about speed and smartphones. That's what they're very much focused on.
Kicking ass.
And South Korea is an example of another, part of Asia where they're very much talking up the kind of manufacturing side of things. They're doing fancy things like combining 5G with virtual reality in factories to sort of make process improvements and stuff. But you don't see the US, to me, just seems to be obsessed with like ramping up smartphone speeds and coverage.
Well, it's because it's a country that a lot of its business is dominated by its marketers, and that's the obvious hook they have right now.
That's the easy thing to market.
I suppose you've got to look at sort of how these economies are really driven. I know Trump has been sort of like banging the manufacturing drum over the last few years, but let's be honest.
Well, the protectionist drum, certainly, but manufacturing being a big part of that,
Yeah, but let's be honest, like Europe and North America are service economies. We're dominated by legal, we're dominated by the internet software,
Germany
dominated by finance.
Germany would push back on that view.
Yeah, but
what was it we were talking about in the last pod? The high
else.
Precision engineering and all that kind of. They're pretty good at that still.
Yeah, but pretty much everyone else.
Yeah, Germany's a bit of an exception, isn't it, in Europe, I suppose, though.
Yeah. No, certainly the UK. No doubt about that.
Certainly the UK, and I'd say the vast majority of North America is a service economy.
All digital and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Europe just come out. I'm not going to talk about it. Europe just come out with its grand plan for digital to try and make Europe a bit less rubbish at digital. But it's so sweeping, so generalised, so just full of vague aspirations. It just looked like a bit of a waste of time to me.
Well, I don't think you can sort of,
just decide
that you're going to do that. You have to. I mean, Silicon Valley sort of developed over years and is a thriving tech hub, but it's not because of. I don't see it being because of
kind of the US government decided.
The US government. I mean, there might be low tax rates and stuff like that, I guess, and favourable sort of.
It's just evolution.
Favourable immigration policies, but it's not. Yeah, it's just evolved, and now it's
because it started off as it started off really, really boring. I mean, everyone thinks that Silicon Valley is this fantastic place with all developers and all that. I mean, it started off as the giants were like AMD and Intel and all that. It was a really hardcore engineering tech.
HP was probably the original Silicon Valley company, and that was your classic start it in your garage thing.
But it wasn't.
So that's cultural.
It wasn't software and services. It was all about components. It was all about racks. It was all about servers.
But they've done a good job of reinventing themselves to be a software, and because they've had that sort of brain power there with Stanford University, and they've had the talent there. So and then it just kind of becomes sort of self-perpetuating, I suppose. Whereas Europe's trying to sort of think. The best thing you could do is just sort of get out of the way, really. I think.
But that's just not what the EU does it?
Rules for this kind of thing.
The EU has to justify its existence by doing the exact opposite of getting out of the way.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not going to start on that. I've already got one commenter giving me a hard time on that.
Oh, really?
He didn't like me having a pop at Europe and calling it undemocratic. And he's bravely called Anon, by the way. Wow. What a keyboard warrior.
It's probably Juncker or someone.
Yeah. Verhofstadt.
Oh, he's gone now, hasn't he? Yeah.
Anyway, so yes, apart from that, at this Huawei event, the thing I took from it is Huawei announcing how many 5G commercial wins it's got. The reason that's significant is, unlike Ericsson and Nokia, there's no public record of its deal wins. So the only time you get it is when it issues a press release where it says something.
Well, it doesn't name the companies.
It doesn't name. Well, that's just something leading up to.
It does some.
Yeah, I think the customers name. I think the customers named Huawei as a supplier.
It did at the round table that we were on. Yeah. So I'm just leading up to that.
No, and in the presentation.
It named regions. Did it name specific? Companies that it had deal wins with. Was that logo thing? Was that the deal wins thing?
Yeah. Those are the people who were 5G customers. Yeah.
I wonder if I took a photo of that. Well, anyway, I was.
Not all of them. There wasn't like 91 companies.
But even Nokia and Ericsson don't do that.
I mean, they have to get permission from the operator to do it. And when I've talked to Ed in the past and Adam, who's no longer there. But when I've talked to those guys, they've always sort of said, well, we just sort of leave it up to the operators, really. But we name the...
And that's exactly the response I got from them this morning when I was writing my story, which was headlined, "Why doesn't Huawei publish its stuff like Ericsson and Nokia does?" Now, so the interesting thing about that response, which is a perfectly reasonable response, but I went back to them and said, yeah, but that's true of Ericsson and Nokia, but they still managed to put the names up. I think Nokia's got 40 named companies and Ericsson's got 35 named companies. So how come they've got that on a website for everyone to see and you haven't got any? Point taken, Jamie, that they mentioned a few and they put up a slide with some logos. They certainly made it clear that they've got deal wins with all three of the big Chinese MNOs, which is no big surprise there. Yeah. They also said, which I haven't written up, that they expect to get a deal win with this fourth one that I was shamefully ignorant about, called something like China Broadcast, something like that.
But a lot of their deals are in Europe, aren't they? Like
47 of the 91, yeah.
Right, so...
And they did mention at that round table Vodafone, without listing every single country. They mentioned Vodafone. But anyway, so I just thought that was a good point, and I had a few people prodding me, going, ask them about this. And the conclusion I came to, and this was partly as a result of a conversation with you, Ian, when I was writing it, is one of the reasons might be that operators feel a bit self-conscious about announcing that they're using Huawei, what with all the...
Well, I don't think they want to go out of their way to say we're using Huawei and we've just done a 5G deal at the moment when there's all this pressure coming from certain parts of the world to sort of get rid of Huawei. And it's not something they really want to trumpet, I don't think. So
no, good almost pun there with trumpet. But I still think that's a bit lame. Because, I mean, Trump could find out. If he wanted to persecute operators who are using Huawei, it wouldn't be difficult to find out.
They could just be making it up.
Yeah, well, so those are
that's going to be the suspicion.
That'd be risky, though.
It's pretty risky because, it's...
Well, those are the two options. Well, so the two options are that they legitimately struggle to get the green light from any operators to admit that they're working with them, which is a bit sad. And then the other one is that they're massaging their figures.
Yeah.
You think that's unlikely, don't you? Because you think it mainly reflects their 4G wins.
I think all this 5G deal win stuff is a little bit of a red herring in a way, because I think your market share doesn't change that much. You know, the easiest thing at the moment, certainly with non-standalone, is to move to 5G with your 4G supplier, and it's not as though operators are considering whether or not to launch 5G. You know, it's not a nice to have; it's a must-have. If you want to remain in the telecom business in the future, then you're going to do 5G. So people are going to do it, and they're going to do it with their existing 4G vendor. And occasionally there are swaps.
Unless you're in the UK and they've gone, you're not allowed.
Yeah, there are swaps that happen. There might be some instances where regulators have come along and said, as in the UK, there's restrictions, and there are instances in Europe of a few swaps happening. But it's the exception rather than the rule. Most of the time, you kind of, and that's why you look at Del Oro's numbers. I've spoken to people like Stefan Pongratz at Del Oro about this, and he's like, the market share changes are not much in the last couple of years, and they don't expect it to change that much with NSA. And this is one of the reasons why there's talk of things like supplier diversity and vendor lock-in, and things that we've gone on about in the podcast in the past, Open RAN. So I tend to find these figures they're coming out with, this sort of, what it shows to me is it kind of confirms the 4G positions those companies have, because if you look at them, Huawei's a bit out in front, Ericsson's kind of in the middle, and Nokia's number 3. Well, that's where they are in 4G.
Yeah.
So you'd sort of expect that to be the case. Now, if Huawei didn't have 91 deals, if it's for some reason was keeping quiet, or we were hearing about swaps happening a lot of the time, then you could say maybe this US campaign is having some kind of effect. But I think the general perception anyway so far has been they've not really seen that big an impact from that. Okay, there's been the UK move, there's been Australia and New Zealand, but most countries haven't come out yet and said, well,
a lot of it's core anyway.
And the things,
so those 91 wins, I got them to confirm are RAN wins.
Yeah, and that's where the money is as well. So that's where the big business is, isn't it?
I mean, traditionally, I don't think Huawei doesn't really care that much about core, does it? Yeah. I mean, you look at I've never been able to actually get anyone to admit this, but you look at actually the money that's being spent. I mean, it's something like, unofficially, people have told me that it's something like 70% of network budget is allocated towards to RAN.
Yeah.
And something like 10%, maybe even less, is actually driven towards the core.
Yeah.
Which is why you've got very specialist players so we never talk about Juniper, but they provide network core equipment.
Yeah.
So the Cisco,
but they don't make that much money out of it.
They don't make that much money, and it's not that big a deal for them.
They had this whole keynote about this new radio stuff where it's like 40% lighter. It's
yeah. I mean, it's big money, because you think like we're not like the UK isn't a massive country. Geographically, I mean,
right? But it's the fifth largest economy in the world.
But geographically,
quite a distant fifth.
But we have 40,000 cell sites in the UK. Now, 40,000 times, let's say, how much is a base station? Between 20 and 25 grand, probably. I mean, that 40,000, then you're talking about small cells on top of that, then you're talking about multiple antennas on each cell site. All of a sudden, that becomes, RAN is bloody expensive. Yeah. It's a really, really big financial contribution. Yeah. Then you look at the size of somewhere like Germany, which is, 2 to 3 times geographically the size of, or maybe 1.5, 2 times the size of the UK.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, you're going to have to start putting a lot more antenna up there to get anywhere near 90 to 100% geographical coverage. The US, Christ, I mean, how many cell sites do they have to put up? I mean, they say Texas is 3 times the size of the UK.
Yeah.
So that's simple mathematics. That's 100,000 base stations that have got to be in Texas.
And you've got
obviously it's not going to work out like
the
that.
Base stations when they get pissed on a Friday.
But there's going to be so many base stations in North America, in China, in Australia. Yeah. Australia's a bad example because the population is so heavily concentrated. What's a country where there's quite an even spread? I suppose the US
distribution of population. Yeah,
the US is probably, but they're banned from it. So it makes it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, anywhere in Europe tends to have a fairly even spread. I mean, it's densely populated everywhere, isn't it?
France is a good example. Yeah, France is a good
spread.
example.
I mean, they're not even Paris as a capital city is nothing like London in terms of the proportion of the population.
It's much smaller as
well. So anyway, so we've got this willy waving going on with who's got the most deal wins, and one of the reasons I write it up is because I know that people like to read about it.
Yeah,
I'm a bit of an old-fashioned journalist in that way.
Well, yeah, the numbers are interesting.
And people get quite excited about it. Yeah. So there's some guy who I presume was a Nokia guy pushing back and going, actually, Nokia's up to 67 now, and ask him. And people wanted me to ask for more granularity from Huawei, which I thought was a reasonable question. And the fact that their competitors publish their stuff and they don't. I mean, the biggest problem with that for Huawei, I don't think Huawei's lying.
No, I don't.
And I think it passes the smell test. They say 91, not 291.
It's similar to Ericsson. It's not that much more.
It's only 10 more than Ericsson. But, we have this sort of underlying knock against Huawei. We were talking about it just before we started recording. Jamie wrote a piece a little while back about this US governmental move to designate everything that comes out of China as intrinsically dodgy. And he characterised it as xenophobic, and I agree with him. Because by definition, if you're saying everything that comes from this certain part of the world is dodgy, then xenophobic literally means fear of strangers. There is some xenophobia.
Crispy duck and pancake.
Well, quite. You can't even skin up some duck now, without being a traitor. So
I mean, arguably, you could say that the Chinese are being a bit more open than the European equipment manufacturers because. I mean, admittedly, ZTE don't do it as often as Huawei, but they've actually said how many base stations they ship. Huawei turned around and said they've shipped 600,000 5G base stations to date. They never say that with Ericsson and Nokia.
No, they don't
refuse to actually say that. ZTE have said in the past, I think it's been about 2 or 3 months since they've actually said it, that how many they've shipped as well.
Yeah.
Which is arguably a better metric.
It's a much better metric, I think, because one contract might equal 20.
Well, like any of the ones in China, for example.
I suspect the European companies might not look very good on that front, and then everybody's going to, which is why they don't want to say it.
Yeah.
But then and the reason being that China seems to have I mean, China's got more base stations than anywhere. It's 60% of the 4G market.
But they haven't.
Is it that big?
It's 60% of the 4G market.
But the Chinese 5G roadmap isn't as far progressed as elsewhere in the world.
Well, they've got 10 million customers now.
But the biggest one, the one where all the base stations seem to have gone, and this might have changed over the last couple of months, was Korea to start with.
Yeah.
And LGU is a Huawei customer, but they're the only Huawei customer. So what is it? KT and SKT are using Ericsson and Samsung. I think they're using. So theoretically, Ericsson should have a major jump.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of base stations that have been shipped out there.
There's still more in China though. At the end of last year, they were targeting I can't remember the number, but it was tens of thousands of 5G base stations to be installed in China by the end of last year. That's China Mobile, China Unicom, and I mean some of it's through that tower.
But tens of thousands is only is a small percentage of 600,000.
It is, but in a market that big, even a small percentage is still a huge number. Whereas we're only talking like 19,000 4G base stations that BT has in the UK, for instance.
Yeah,
but
South
Korea's not that big.
My point is that if you're talking about the progress of China and you're saying tens of thousands of 5G base stations have been deployed, that's still a small percentage of the 600,000 that Huawei have shipped. So these 5G base stations are going somewhere else, not China.
Okay.
So theoretically, Ericsson and Nokia should be on a level playing field because because China only accounts for a small percentage of the 600,000 so far.
Yeah, well, they're probably on 400, something like that. They're going to look. There's still going to be a big gap because I suspect all the stuff that's been done in China so far is probably ZTE and Huawei.
Yeah.
Because the Europeans always get a small share anyway, and they're kind of waiting for big contracts to be announced. So
and clearly, in terms of their corporate communications, they want to have this pissing competition.
Yeah.
And it clearly does interest them because any time I write about it, loads of people get interested. My biggest knock on Huawei not doing it, for whatever reason, the most sympathetic reason is that their operator partners bottle it because they don't want Trump to tell them off. And the least sympathetic reason is that those numbers are a bit meddled with. And they don't. That's why they don't want to be transparent. I'm not saying where on that continuum I lie. It is an opportunity for them to demonstrate transparency once more.
Yeah,
and it's one that they're currently declining. And I just think it wouldn't kill them. But if they can't get the people to sign it off, that's fine. But it was clear yesterday that obviously the Chinese ones will. They mentioned Vodafone in Europe. Vodafone
stuck its hand up and sort of joined in that argument about banning it. So
we're getting close to 10 already.
Yeah.
So I'm sure a lot of it's Asia. About 27 of the wins were in Asia. They're not that bothered about Trump, are they? In most of Asia, if you take Japan and South Korea and Australasia out of it, all Indonesia, all that bit.
Maybe it's just that they can't. Maybe they will start to do it now. Maybe there's an element of we can't really be asked, because you can find, if you go to Deutsche Telekom's website and look for press releases about 5G trials it's been doing, there's lots of mentions of Huawei.
That's what I'm saying.
And yet they wouldn't specifically call it out. Maybe they did yesterday. I don't know, but they haven't done until yesterday anyway. Certainly.
Yeah.
And
what's that?
Deutsche Telekom was not a company that Huawei ever sort of publicly said, we're doing 5G stuff with them. It's always come from DT, but the name,
but they're not
the association's there. It's not hidden.
They're not hiding it. They're just not shouting it on the rooftop.
So Huawei's been in a position for quite a long time where it could have said we're doing stuff with Deutsche Telekom, and I don't think it has done. It's not sort of put that name up there as one of its 5G customers. Okay. So maybe there's just this element of. They started thinking about this. Let's name the number of wins, but let's not actually name the customers because that's up to them. And then they've just kind of run with it. And now there's a bit of pressure on them to actually start naming customers. So maybe we'll see a change. And it sounds like you saw a bit of it yesterday anyway.
Well, if we do see a change, I'll take credit for it.
It's all down to you, guys.
They were ringing up Ren going, look, Scott's been writing this shit about us. We better get on it. Okay.
Well, they might be doing.
Yeah, I'd like to flatter myself that much. Right. Okay. We were going to sort of mention coronavirus just because there's a few angles there. Firstly, I thought it was interesting that Huawei sought to reassure everyone by saying, look, anyone who's come over from China, we've kept them locked in a room for 2 weeks before we let them out. So, they're really acutely aware of how that's all going, how the mild panic is going globally. But it will seem fine. There weren't any even people wearing face masks or anything yesterday. It was all business as usual. But there've been a couple other things. Jamie, you asked when we had this round table. Your line of questioning was on sort of supply chain disruption for coronavirus. Why don't you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's standing off a bit at the moment, but it just beggars belief that the big equipment manufacturers are standing quite resolute at the moment. In particular, with regard to shutting down factories, because we all know that China has shut down factories, and it hasn't impacted that much the southern regions, the southern states. So where you look, where the likes of Huawei have their headquarters and ZTE have their headquarters around Shenzhen, but if it does spread down there, there could be some major knock-on effects onto the supply chain. ZTE have confirmed that their factories were shut. What they've tried to spin off as an extended spring break. But realistically, the Chinese government did tell them to shut down their manufacturing sites.
We had that a bit from Huawei yesterday about the sort of holiday dragging on, that sort of thing.
But I mean, that was the Huawei angle, but it's not true. The government's, because they told Ericsson to shut down their manufacturing sites, and Ericsson did that.
So they're sort of conflating that public holiday with the coronavirus.
I think so. Yeah,
there is that going on.
But there is going to be a fundamental impact because, I mean, admittedly, Ryan Deng, the CEO of the carrier network, turned around and he said, "Well, there was an impact, but over the next 3 to 6 months, we don't think it will affect our ability to produce products because we had stockpiles." And I was like, fair enough, but I think there will be a few, if this carries on for much longer, and if it does spread down into the southern states around where you've got the R&D and manufacturing functions, or in and around Shenzhen, you could start to see a real impact on the supply chain. Not only Huawei's ability to produce products, but the ability of, well, I say Huawei, any of them, the ability to produce products, but the ability to source components to go into those products. Because you're going to have contract manufacturers that are producing the various semiconductors and the different components in China, because it makes sense if the product's going to be put together there, we might as well manufacture all the bits of it there. So it is going to have, I mean, if assuming coronavirus carries on going.
Yeah, so the impression...
I'm actually wondering if when the spring comes in, usually viruses kind of die out. Is the season going to save us?
It could be. I mean, viruses, from my limited recollection of my microbiology degree, you might not know that, listeners. Viruses tend to exist within a very narrow temperature range, which is why your body gives you a fever. Which is why when you get a fever, within reason, it's best not to try and suppress it, because all you got to do is increase your body temperature by less than a degree, and that's often enough to kill off the viruses. So that could also be environmental. It could be as soon as the weather warms up, things get better.
Yeah, but this could be a freak virus.
It could also be a freak thing.
The Spanish flu wasn't killed off by warmer weather. I mean, that lasted for a while and it killed a hell of a lot of people.
I don't know whether it kicked off in the winter or not, actually. Do you know?
Well, it killed. I don't know
more
exactly.
people in the First World War.
No, I know it killed a lot of people. I just don't know how long it took to get all that work done.
Well, I mean, this is a massive assumption based on no evidence whatsoever.
That's all right. It never stops me.
But I can't imagine the hundreds of thousands of people that were killed by the Spanish flu were done during the flu season.
No,
it would take a long time.
But they didn't have Purell, so
no, exactly. Those little hand wipe machines.
Well, they also didn't have international travel. Spreading it around quickly.
They'd also
the London Underground.
The London Underground.
You would die on the ship on the way somewhere.
They'd also just had a catastrophic war.
Not a lot of it.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Well, I mean, metro systems. If it gets into any city with a significant metro system, like Paris, for instance, or Madrid, or Barcelona, or London, well, maybe not New York, because New York's quite open air, isn't it? But
when you're in the carriages, you're still
but it's not
breathing all over each other.
No, but when you get out, I mean, it's not as contained. The air isn't as contained.
It's
way more shallow.
I was reading another thing. There's a very learned chap called Matt Ridley who writes a lot about environmentalism from quite a sceptical perspective. And I was reading him in Spectator, and he was talking about why it is that we keep catching stuff off bats, because apparently it's officially, they reckon it's because, was it Wuhan? Is that the...
Wuhan, yeah. That wasn't Ground Zero. The state next door, I think Wuhan has had the biggest impact, doesn't it? But then there's a city next door which begins with H, I think.
Okay,
right.
That's had the biggest impact.
Anyway, they reckon that maybe because one of those places got a live animal market, that was where it kicked off. And then he's talking about the reason you get it from bats is because they're animals, so they're sort of histologically, which means to do with tissue and cells and that sort of thing, similar to us, as opposed to reptiles or whatever.
Right.
They're also social, and so they congregate in large groups, so they can sort of spread. But they're not. There's no domesticated form of bat. Right. You don't keep a bat at home, do you? Throw sticks for it.
Unless you're Batman.
Well, quite. And I think he more sort of cohabited. I don't think he domesticated them. They just accepted him as one of them. Anyway, so
but wasn't he scared of them? Isn't it the whole
that
thing?
Was part of his thing. Yeah, he fell down a hole with bats in it.
He uses the fear of bats to
keep him sharp.
Yeah.
I think the way the bats think is that it could be like they grab a piece of fruit or vegetable and they eat partially like a piece of it, and then they drop it somewhere else, and another animal picks it up, and that's when
so this guy was just saying no, it's straight off bats, because basically not all people realise that viruses mutate a hell of a lot. It's just normal for them to mutate in a way that would kill a larger organism, and so you can get a bat coronavirus that just gives bats a cold and then they're sneezing all over their cave, but it's not a problem for anyone else. But then one little mutation will turn that bat coronavirus into something that can be passed over into humans. And because they're mammals and because there's thousands of them all hanging off the roof together, you're more likely to have that mutation happen just in a probability way among bats, according to this article, than anyone else, which is an interesting thing. Anyway, but the other thing he said, and the reason I brought it up, is the further away a virus gets from its host, from its original thing, the less virulent it seems to get, or the less lethal it is. You very rarely get viruses that are both very virulent and very lethal. And there's certain basic Darwinian reasons for that, because if they kill loads of people straight away, then the virus dies, it runs out of hosts. So you either get ones that are not very virulent and quite lethal, or quite virulent and not very lethal, and this is the latter category.
Right.
Anyway, that's an interesting little tangent. I think the long and short of it is, you're probably right, Jamie, by the time we get to spring, it'll all start to peter out. And, the other thing, before we move on from that particular subject, you also wrote a piece based on chatting to some people behind the scenes about the effect it might have on Release 16, which is the big next major 3GPP iteration of 5G. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is just... it's one of the greatest ironies of this industry that an electronic, a telco association cannot create an electronic standards or codes for radio communications without meeting in person. So it's somewhat of an irony, but. The 3GPP and the Release 16 is sort of like scheduled to be frozen, as it were, when you get to all agreements on the standards.
That's it. No turning back.
By June, but in the next month, they're doing all the work on finalising the specifications for the RAN components, so the standalone RAN. So each of these releases goes through discussing certain aspects of the industry, most of which can run in parallel. But because RAN is so important and it dictates the roadmap and the progress of 5G deployment, this is a major sort of hurdle, and one that has to be satisfied before anyone can move on. So, for instance, virtualization has already been largely sorted out for Release 16. They're working through the RAN components, and then once they've done the RAN components, they can move forward into developing the specifications for core technologies, network slicing, all the other little bits of air that are associated with Release 16. However, all of the meetings have now been cancelled for Q1. Right. They have also been
for the same reasons
for coronavirus, because you need people to fly in and be in the same room. They are now e-meetings, and all of the meetings so far have been cancelled for Q2 as well, because they were due to take place in China. So they are looking for alternative venues for these meetings now. or they are also looking at whether it can be e-meetings. The big issue...
Everything's sorted out electronically.
Yeah.
And we think that's unlikely.
Highly, highly unlikely. You can't... irrelevant of how good technology is nowadays, there is still nothing quite like face-to-face meeting to iron out all the creases.
Exactly. We've never been tempted to do this podcast over the phone, have we?
That's the bonus. Without that beer, you can't...
If there wasn't a beer after, Ian wouldn't ever do this podcast.
This is what my source said to me. It's like, you can have these official meetings, but the majority of the creases are ironed out over a coffee, over dinner, over a beer. That's where the actual agreements happen. So you can't actually have these. That doesn't happen over email. It doesn't happen over phone. It doesn't happen over video link. So one little issue could be interlinked to other areas, and then all of a sudden you've got an entire release which is pushed back for a couple of months because the plenaries that are taking place in March for the RAN components just aren't. There's no agreements.
Well,
it's also one final point. Sorry, it's also a lot easier to be nasty when you're not sat in front of someone.
Well, quite well. I was just going to lead up to the face-to-face versus not face-to-face thing. So we all know what a horrible place the internet and places like Twitter are, and a lot of that is because of this illusion of safety and invulnerability people get because they're sort of shielded electronically. But I think on the flip side, just
the Zoom conference stock went up dramatically since.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it did.
Are they one of the main sort of conference people? Yeah. But I think non-verbal cues. You just sat in a room. That's why I don't think we could do this podcast. Or at least it wouldn't be anywhere near as good if we weren't all sat in a room together because we've got non-verbal cues. Yeah, or by email, non-verbal,
very interesting.
People just got to watch this hour-long stream of typing. Sounds like some of my IM groups with my mates. They can go on quite a while. You just can't do it. Non-verbal cues, facial expressions, body language. I'm sitting here. I'm the one who's supposed to be sort of keeping it on track, and I can see out of the corner of my eye whether one of you two guys wants to say something. None of that stuff happens on the phone, or even with people try and do it with video conferencing, but I'm not convinced. So the long and short of it, Jamie, is that release 16, which already got delayed by 3 months, might get delayed by another few months. You reckon?
Yeah. Or that's what I've been hearing. The 3GPP has been turning around and saying that we're not going to delay it at the moment. We're going to wait for. We're confident it can stay on track, but
I would say that
they're not committing to it 100%. Their PR person did email me and say, look, all the chairs of the working groups and the technical specification groups are going to be meeting in March. Then we can give you a much clearer picture about what going forward. So that's a reasoned approach. At least they're not completely ruling it out, and they are being a bit more realistic. But I mean, to be honest, this is bad news for everyone. I mean, the telcos are going to be turning around and saying, well, we want to do standalone 5G. Mm-hmm. The Open RAN guys or the Open Community guys are going, well, we want standalone as well, because that detracts telcos from their traditional vendor base in 4G and 3G. And the vendors are turning around saying, don't be a dick. We've been telling people that 5G is going to recapture lost fortunes, and
it's really going to take off with release 16.
And then all of a sudden, if it gets pushed back a couple of months, that's another quarter where the investors have to turn around and say, well, how long do you want to? I mean, the guy in charge, I can never remember his name. The guy in charge of Nokia,
Rajeev Suri.
Yeah. How many quarters and financial earning calls has he turned around and said, look,
hang in there.
It's tough, but it's about to get better. How many has he said? How many times has he said that?
A lot.
He could. He might have to do it again.
Yeah.
I mean, could
people
that be his job?
People are going to start throwing rotten vegetables at him.
Well, it might. I mean, it might be his job at some point. Shareholders are going to turn around and saying, well, flat dividends and no share price increase and no top line revenue increase.
Sick of your excuses, son.
Definitely under some pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't going to help this year with all the stuff that's going on.
That's the last thing they need. Before we go away from coronavirus, I should mention a story I wrote earlier on this week regarding the fallout from the Mobile World Congress cancellation. So I stress that no one thinks GSMA is happy about it. Everyone knows it's put the GSMA in a completely crappy situation. And I feel a lot of sympathy for the situation they're in. But having said that, there was always going to be a but, wasn't there? It's, they've come out and said no one's getting any refunds at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Even people who you cancelled on us and we paid.
Doesn't matter whether you cancelled before or after they cancelled.
Oh.
They're just saying there's a clause 2110 in their T's and C's that says acts of God, tough shit, basically.
Force majeure.
That's it. Force. Yeah, I know. We've even reduced to using French words to describe this situation. And a few people are coming out of the woodwork going, I'm not sure how happy I am about that. Sympathetic though I am to the GSMA's plight. And so I wrote up a story because a few people had showed me there was a round of communication GSMA did, I think, on Tuesday, going, look, here's the situation. Long and short of it is you're getting nothing back, but bear with us. We're going to come out with a proposal by the end of March to sort of try and take the edge off it a little bit, which would be probably something along the lines of, I would guess, sort of reduced rates for next year or other GSMA events, all that sort of thing. How much of a consolation people who are massively out of pocket will find from that. And they also said that it's uninsurable. Now, I was very sceptical about that. I was like, you what? How can anything be uninsurable? It's just a matter of picking the right policy. But I think chatting to you, Ian, you're going, no, that does happen with, was it you? No, maybe it's someone else.
No, it's me.
It was you, sorry.
Yeah.
Same difference.
Yeah. Well, this is back to the problem. This is on IM. I forget who I'm speaking to. So yeah, you were saying that there are some things that are just uncoverable or are always going to come under exclusions.
Yeah, flights, for instance.
I was just reading something on the way in.
Back.
Sorry?
You didn't get your flight money back?
Not yet. I've just given it to a law firm to say, get me my money.
Well, I've been slack on the flight front, but it was only about 100
Oh, no, I'm talking about a different
thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I was reading something, I think Keith at Mobile Network had done a further dig into the insurance side of it and seen that this sort of thing comes under exclusion. So maybe I was wrong to be that sceptical about it being uninsurable. It just seemed like a hell of a claim to make.
Yeah.
So that's the issue really. And the big thing I said at the bottom of that piece was one of the things that is going to... So Matt's, how do you pronounce his surname?
That's Granrid.
Granrid. You're so much better at foreign names.
Where's he from?
I think he's
Sweden,
Swedish.
I think, yeah.
Oh.
I think he used to be at Ericsson.
I think he was at one of the carriers for a while, Telia or something.
Okay, maybe why. He's doing the circuit, isn't he? He's doing the CEO circuit. He's come out a couple of times and called for solidarity.
Right.
It's not about money.
And it's not about money, as per your excellent little bit at the beginning. What's the technical name for the bit at the beginning?
Intro?
Intro, yeah, okay, that'll do. I thought there might be some Ponzi TV name.
No.
So your intro to last week's podcast said it's not about money. They keep saying it's not about the money.
He's talking about the promo, not the
No, but he also did the intro to the pod.
Yeah, both.
They keep saying it's not about the money, and it's like, well, here's a bit though, isn't it? And
for Spain, it is.
Well, and for Spain, it massively is.
Yeah.
But then the other point is that no one doubts that GSMA makes a ton of money out of Mobile Congress. Now, fine, they're entitled to make some money out of it. It's a great show. It's the most important event of the year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I know you've had it as well. You speak to some exhibitors when you're at the show, and you nearly always get some grumbles about the cost of everything, how they basically feel squeezed every year, don't they?
Yeah.
So that, I think, is where GSMA is going to struggle most for this solidarity.
Well, if they're not getting insurance on it, and they were expected to provide refunds to a vast number of companies, because it was still, I think up to the point when they cancelled, there was still a huge number of exhibitors that were planning on doing it.
Yeah.
Probably more than a
The majority, I think, yeah.
Oh, no, I think there was only... I mean, there's something like 800 exhibitors there.
There's 2,800 altogether.
2,800 exhibitors.
Yeah.
I only saw something like 40
Yeah.
odd cancellations.
It was who those cancellations were. But a lot of these smaller companies, and they're the ones that you really feel sorry for, because there are
the ones that have been
companies
getting in touch
we
with me
talk
as well.
to, and they feel really shafted because they spend quite a lot of their marketing budget on this.
Quite arguably the majority of their annual marketing
and they're going to
budget.
want their cash back. Now, on the one hand, I can sympathise. This is a problem with having It's like having one of your customers that generates 50% of your revenues. It's that one of those semiconductor firms in the US that supplies Huawei. There's a couple of them. Neophotonics. As soon as something goes wrong with that one contract, you're in real trouble, and that's basically what's happened to GSMA. All of its eggs are in this Barcelona basket.
I think there's another massive issue in that it's an MPO, so it can't be seen to be profitable. So it has to spend all the money that it makes every single year.
Yeah.
So you can't build that free cash flow in the bank account. So if something like this happen, you have money that can pay out, and you can just say, well, look, we've got this there. We can still carry on operating.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an issue. If the GSMA has to refund everyone, and it's that much of a contributor to its
it's massive layoffs. It could finish it off.
It could. It also funds working groups. It also, there's a lot of stuff that the GSMA. Everyone talks about them about being just a money grabbing lobby group, but they do fund a lot of industry events.
And then the guys who were demanding refunds then have to ask themselves, well, is it worth that? If the GSMA does go under, then is that a worse impact?
Well, that was the other point I made in my story. Is there's no point in just chasing short-term cash flow wins if there's no event next year.
Exactly.
Talk about self-defeating.
So maybe he's, looking at it from their side of view, he's probably got a point that everybody needs to take a bit of a hit. But I think they need to try and there's got to be some meeting in the middle, hasn't there? Where, like you say, they offer a better deal next year or something, and they start to look at...
Well, maybe stop skanking people quite so much every year.
Exactly,
That's the thing. They're a non-profit, as Jamie says. Anyone who's had a look at their accounts... Oh, hello. Got to hang
Is that your mum?
My dad, actually.
Oh, his dad, it was...
Oh, no, I tried to hang it up and I ended up answering it. I tried to hang it up and I ended up answering it, so all he's going to hear is me going, it's my dad. Anyway, sorry, Dad, I'll have to ring you back. Just the amount... so they're... Oh, good God. Right, I'm going to have to shut this up.
Don't have copyright for that intro.
I thought I had it on Do Not Disturb mode.
Well, no, Do Not Disturb mode doesn't stop calls coming in.
Yeah, it does.
No, it should stop. It just rings silent.
Well, I've just turned my phone off.
It stops you. Just put it on airplane mode.
I've just turned it off. Doesn't happen.
Anyway.
Yes, it's not very professional, is it?
It's funny, though.
Yes, so they're a non-profit. Anyone who's had little butchers at their accounts, which I have from time to time, can see that there's a big gulf between the amount of revenue they make and the overheads associated with Mobile Congress. They can also see, and I'm not going to put any numbers on it, but plenty of people are doing all right out of GSMA. And that's where it is. I completely agree. There needs to be solidarity. The GSMA is, in principle, there for everyone, although it's just there to serve mobile operators as opposed to vendors, technically.
Well, I think it's
an industry
that's the charter, I think, and the board. But I think as a general association, I think, or let's call it what it is. It's a lobby group. It lobbies governments and
as you say, it does these working groups. Yeah, it does a few things.
But its job is to lobby the government and regulators for the benefit of the telecommunications industry.
Yeah, so like
the
price of spectrum and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I mean, lobby sounds like a negative word. I mean, it is negative, but in this instance, where it's lobbying for the benefit of the telecommunications industry, it can be very positive because some governments, in particular India, have shown that they're completely incompetent at running the telco industry.
Yeah, I mean, lobbying. If you want to put it uncharitably, lobbying is legal corruption, but that's fine. That's the way the world works.
Yeah,
politicians are there to be influenced, sadly. But yeah, so that's the long and short of it. I do feel sympathy for them. I certainly hope they don't go under. I certainly hope that all the other events they run go fine. But I think they need to take a look in the mirror and ask themselves whether they need to extract every last penny of profit out of their exhibitors that they do. Because I get the impression that it's a fairly ruthless commercial setup when it comes to Mobile Congress. So there we go. Now, I think there was a slight coronavirus angle on the DT. So
there was,
Deutsche Telekom.
That's not really what I wrote about. But I did actually write. I wrote two stories. I did one.
Okay, well, anyway, I won't put words in your mouth.
He got asked about coronavirus.
So we had their quarterlies, didn't we? Deutsche Telekom's quarterlies.
Yeah, and I'll come on to those in a minute. But he did get, the CEO got asked about what impact coronavirus was having on the call, and he said that he was quite optimistic actually about the handset side of things. He said in terms of which is interesting because he started off by saying we have to keep an eye on what Apple said which had sort of flagged up missing, revenue targets because of disruption.
That's right. They didn't invest.
And then Hertz also said Foxconn has indicated it's operating kind of below capacity and everything as well. Yeah. But he said we aren't seeing any kind of handset constraints at the moment. Warehouses are quite full, and that's not an issue.
And actually, Huawei yesterday said that on the handset side they got no worries.
Yeah,
I think they got stockpiles.
They've got stockpiles. Yeah. So he was more worried about what's happening on the network equipment side. He said he was sort of warning there could be some disruption there, and he said I could talk about specific vendors, but I won't, which was kind of interesting. And made this big deal about them having. This is one of the reasons why they have the dual vendor strategy, to sort of try and offset pressure, which is interesting because one of the things Ericsson's done apparently is ramp up production in one of its other global facilities to kind of offset what's been going on in China. So it had to close the factory in China.
They've got a regionalised manufacturing setup.
They've got two big manufacturing sites that do global stuff. One's in Tallinn and one's in Nanjing.
Yeah,
and they're building one in
Texas,
the US.
Is it?
It's a place called Louisville. So but mainly for North America.
Well, that's what they said to me before, that
Louisville, Kentucky.
If you buy a product in Europe, it's generally manufactured in Tallinn.
Yeah.
So the vast majority of Ericsson's manufacturing setup, if the majority of their customers are in North America and Europe, it's not going to be impacted that much.
Yeah.
It is the Chinese setup that should be a major concern, but I don't know how much of an impact that would have.
Well,
on
he
DT.
said so. They basically closed, and then they reopened on the 10th of February.
Yeah,
and he said the Nanjing factory is running at capacity. This is Yedling. This is head of networks. This is from. But he said there has been some impact, but it's recoverable, and it's recoverable partly through kind of ramping up production at Tallinn, basically. So they were sort of fairly optimistic about it. But it's certainly something that DT has sort of given a warning of and said it could affect things in the future. And then there was like the bigger earnings thing, which I thought was interesting. I just thought it was an interesting time for them because it's apparently 25 years since they were sort of first privatised.
Okay.
So they had this big birthday cake they were kind of showing off.
Because they're obviously the German equivalent of BT, aren't they?
Yeah. It's also now 6 years since Hertz became CEO, so he took over in 2014 at the start of the year. And they're on the cusp of this merger now in the US, which has still got a couple of hurdles to clear, but it looks more likely that's going to get done.
Is there anything that could scupper it still?
Well, they still needs to get approval from Californian authorities. Oh, right. And there's something called the Tunney Act, which is all about antitrust, has to sort of...
And shareholders.
Yeah,
sure.
But
haven't they checked in with shareholders?
No, because they've
changed the deal terms yesterday.
Because they had to renegotiate.
Renegotiate.
Because with every passing time, the T-Mobile's been stronger and Sprint's been weaker relative to each other.
So they've renegotiated, which means that DT ends up with a slightly bigger stake, and Sprint is down, and SoftBank's less, and public shareholders are up a bit as well. So
only fractionally. I think
only small.
From what I saw, that
it's 43% for DT, up from 42%.
Yeah, but it's something like they're now Sprint now has to offer 11 shares
11
per T-Mobile, which rather than 9.
Yeah.
But the general public, if you own, or if I can't remember what it was, but that's only for SoftBank and T-Mobile, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you go to the general market, it's staying at the terms beforehand, 9.7 shares per every one T-Mobile, which is a bit dodgy.
But technicalities aside, they do look like they're going to get that done now. It could. You never know. I mean, people were optimistic before and it didn't happen, so who knows? But
it's looking likely. A lot of the legal resistance has gone away. Isn't it?
And the other thing about their results was just really good set of results. I mean, across all the. I mean, he's been a really good CEO, I think, at turning that around. I remember under Rene Obermann, they had all sorts of problems. They had troubles with trying to lay off staff to get the business looking more efficient, because it was like always regarded as like one of the most bloated telcos there was. There was, Europe underperformed for years, even under Hertz, and they sort of finished. You look at 2019, and it's not spectacular growth. It's like 1% in Germany or something.
Right.
It's pretty good in Europe. It's up about 3% sales.
Do you know off the top of your head where else they are in Europe?
Well, they've got I think it's mainly most Central Europe. They've got like a lot of operations. It's 8 or 9 markets, I think they're in.
Right. They're definitely in Czech Republic.
They're Czech Republic,
Netherlands, but they're trying to exit there.
Possibly, yeah.
But Greece, definitely.
Yeah.
Do they still own a piece of EE?
No.
No, I think
not even after it got bought.
So.
They cashed in when BT bought it.
I think they own.
Was it that? Because I remember one of them was still clinging on after the BT acquisition.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
And
but that was a very, very small amount, not very much at all.
Yeah, so their share price was up quite a bit, like 4%, 4 or 5%, which is not something you see very often with European telco incumbents. That kind of increase. So
the thing is that their engine is ridiculous, though, isn't it? Like you were talking about before,
a lot of it's
North
coming from North America. Like that business, just keeps adding subscribers, and so I guess the question is whether that's going to be sustainable once they complete this merger and the focus changes.
And what are they going to do after crazy John Ledger goes?
John Ledger's going to go. It's a big change in management and. So there's a lot of question marks there. The other thing I've noticed is how many jobs they've cut now since. So I was having a look at this, and since he took over, they've basically, and there's not been that much divestment activity, but they've cut 18,000 positions, which I think is about 8% of the workforce as it was at the end of 2013, and that's all come in Europe and Germany, basically all those cuts. Okay. So the US business has actually grown. They've taken on additional staff.
They will be cutting before too long.
Yeah,
it would be well hidden.
They say they're not going to, but how can they not?
Yes, it's impossible.
You don't need two managers of core networks when you're bringing it all together. So.
No, you don't need two retail locations on Dallas High Street either.
Yeah.
And you don't need two CFOs. You don't need.
Well, most big M&A is about sort of all those efficiencies. Pierre, you keep looking neurotically at camera. How much time have we got left?
No, this one is running out of juice.
Okay. Running out of juice.
Those are
we might have to just talk about wearables another day, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because the camera's running out of juice. So, on that note, before we completely run out of juice, thanks a lot for listening and make sure you join us for the next one.